Дякую. Наступний доповідач професор Розhnova. Good afternoon, and are you going to talk in Russian? Is it connected to yesterday's decision of our government? Okay, good evening, and I'm going to talk about the scientific work on constructional details for reconstructive operations and oral surgery on basis of nanostructured epoxy-polyurethane composition material with prolongated medical action. The work was done as a part of a scientific project of developing new production technologies for osteosynthesis parts based on the epoxy polyurethane and medicines. It was done by the Institute of High Molecular Chemistry. Supervisor, Madam Brokerage. The main task was to introduce in the medical practice the new osteosynthesis parts. What is osteosynthesis and why do we need parts for it? Osteosynthesis is basically a connection of fragments of bone and fixation of them with the use of different materials. The goal of osteosynthesis is to provide a rigid fixation of the fragments to their assimilation. Osteosynthesis and bone synthesis using various fixation methods, plates of different shapes and sizes which have holes through which through these holes by bolts the plates are fixed on the bone tissue. The face or skull surgery, the biodegradable plates and titanium-based plates are used. The constructional the parts comprised of titanium plates and bolts are implanted in the bone, and after that they remain there. And on opinion of many surgeons is that there's no reason to remove them. But in the recent time, there are publications that doubt this opinion. The following reasons: when using the metallic parts, there's a limited there's a limited accretion of bone tissue, the deviation of radiation beams when using radiotherapy, titanium alloys. There's possible cancerogenic action of certain additives, and the feelings of patients. They don't want to live with metallic parts in their body. All these factors lead to the necessity to remove the parts of this construct after consolidation and accretion of bone fragments. Considering the results we obtained, we looked through the possible biodegradable bone implants. We have developed a biodegradable epoxy-urethane composite, and we have also made the plates and the elements of the fixtures. The implants biodegrade and are replaced by the bone tissue, whereas there's a stimulation of regeneration of tissues, and the plates have a prolonged medical action. The use of biodegradable plates allows to avoid certain negative factors that can be observed when using metallic constructs. There's no need in the secondary surgery, but I would like to note that biodegradable plates are not a full alternative to titanium. In some cases, they cannot be replaced. Primarily, it's about complex fractures or breakages, and those places where bone has a significant physical load. A static load is more pertinent to middle and lower parts of the facial bones. Mostly now are used the degradable plates from rhyolite, made from rhyolite. This table shows the characteristics of plates of polylactate and polyurethane plates that we invented. So epoxy-urethane plates have advantages. The relative prolongation. Epoxy-urethane composite is more flexible, which allows the plates to more densely lie adjacent to the bone tissue. Epoxy-urethane also stimulates bone regeneration and has a prolonged medical effect. The material itself and the technology of its production, as well as the plates, are protected by Ukrainian patents. You can see them on the slide. As well as epoxy-urethane component is how is it obtained? It's obtained on the base of polyurethane and its epoxy component. It's epoxy resin AD20, which is a product of condensation of epichlorohydrin with diphenyl propane. Epoxy polyurethane composite is initially a mixture of epoxy oligomer, polyurethane, and epoxy polyurethane copolymer, which is resulting from the synthesis. Epoxy oligomer makes it hard. Polyurethane reduces the brittleness, and epoxy polyurethane copolymer is a compatibilizer, which connects these two phases, epoxy non-compatible phases, epoxy polymer and polyurethane. In the further mechanical mixture, we add inorganic fillers and drugs. The solidification occurs at 70 degrees for 8 hours. The result, we have a plate. Out of it, we then cut out the necessary parts for bone areas. Of course, this is all based on scientific research, and I will give you some of our results. We have done the comparative physical chemical tests of several samples of epoxy-urethane composita. We established the optimal concentration of the fillers with break resistance, as you can see on the slide, plus the environments that makes it more acceptable by the body. The prolonged medical effect for 160 days, which is an important factor because we have a non-stop delivery of the target at the place of implant. One of the very important characteristics of every polymer for medicine is the biodegradability. So this material can be suggested as a source of, as a base of implants, temporary implants, or the implants that remain. We have studied by various methods, compared their characteristics and after incubation in the environment up to 6 months. We have established that before that, the material were expressed stability. Their biodegradability was from 10 to 40%, depending on various fillers that were used, silicagel or aerosol. So we have seen the physical chemical properties, which were quite enough at the period of bone effects, medical effects on the bones. The biocompatibility was looked into. We've done the medical biological studies as to how this material complies with the ISO standard. We're doing sanitary chemical tests, in vitro tests on cytotoxicity, tissue culture, implantation experiment to laboratory animals, and irritation and sensibilization was studied. We've implanted the parts to experimental lab animals, and we observed the regeneration and replacement of an implant by bone tissue. So these composites were recommended for production of implants for bone tissues. We have developed the technical conditions of construction materials for osteosynthesis. Well, on this slide, you can see the main parameters and physical chemical properties compliant with these conditions and requirements. We can customize for different sizes and parameters. Any medicinal novelty should be approved by the Ministry of Health. The osteosynthesis plates are registered by the Ministry of Health of Ukraine and went through all the stages, the technical tests, the technical requirements, the sanitary epidemic department of Ukraine, and all the clinical tests, and the registration and licensing itself. The clinical tests were passed on the Department of Surgical Dentistry and the surgery of face, where we had operated on more than 30 patients. According to the conclusion, these parts comply with all the requirements. They are licensed for the use of for treatment of fractures of the facial bones, which do not carry significant load. And according to the order of the Medical Academy, these parts have medicinal effect. They are compliant with their medical indication. They are safe to use, and they can be used in medical practice in Ukraine. This slide shows the necessary permits and licenses that we have achieved, we have acquired. Thank you. Are there any questions? No questions? How much time did it take you to get all the permits? The last patent was in 2011. Yeah, so the permits, November 7th, we got our license. How many years it took? Well, scientific work went on for 5 years at least. A registration over the course of scientific technical project, which is still ongoing. Thank you. Give my regards to Natalia Andreevna and tell her that she has to be more thorough when preparing slides in English, because there are many errors, there are many mistakes.